The Galactic Educational Exchange Program had been operating for approximately 4,000 standard cycles, give or take a few centuries depending on which calendar system one preferred to acknowledge. It was, by all accounts across 17 different star systems, the pinnacle of interspecies academic achievement, a glittering jewel of cooperation where the brightest minds from the softest, most civilized worlds gathered to share knowledge, culture, and an alarming amount of anxiety about final examinations. The Celestial Academy orbited a perfectly average yellow star in a perfectly boring section of space that nobody particularly wanted to conquer, which made it ideal for educational purposes. Its crystalline spires reached toward the void with architectural ambition, housing lecture halls equipped with atmospheric controls for every conceivable respiratory requirement. The student body represented 43 species, each more delicate and refined than the last, each having evolved on worlds where the most dangerous predator was perhaps an overly aggressive fruit or a mildly inconvenient weather pattern. Then the humans applied. The admissions committee had deliberated for 6 months. Humans were new to the galactic stage, having only recently discovered faster-than-light travel by, according to the reports, pointing explosives in the opposite direction they wanted to go and hoping for the best. Their homeworld, Earth, was classified as a Class 7 Deathworld, which was a polite way of saying it was a nightmarish hellscape where everything was trying to kill everything else. And somehow life had looked at these conditions and said, challenge accepted. But the humans had submitted all the proper paperwork. They'd passed the entrance examinations, though several proctors had needed to take stress leave afterward, and the Galactic Educational Exchange Program prided itself on inclusivity, assuming one didn't count the 17 species they'd quietly denied entry to for being culturally incompatible, which was diplomatic speak for too weird even for us. So they accepted one human. As an experiment, what could possibly go wrong? The human arrived on a Tuesday, which several faculty members would later agree was somehow fitting, Tuesday being the most deceptively ordinary day of the week across most galactic cultures. The students stood in the arrival bay wearing what appeared to be standard academy attire, looking remarkably unbothered by the fact that they'd just traveled 300 light-years in a ship that recycled its own waste product. Welcome, the orientation coordinator, a Felixian named Henna, with fur the color of sunset and eyes like liquid gold, chirped nervously. Felixians were cat-like, if cats had evolved on a world where the biggest concern was whether the ambient temperature was too warm, or merely comfortable. We're so pleased to have you. Your quarters have been prepared with Earth-standard atmosphere, gravity, and she consulted her datapad, whiskers twitching, an extensive list of warning labels about things you should absolutely not touch, consume, or breathe near. The human smiled, which displayed an alarming number of forward-facing teeth designed for tearing meat. Henna's tail poofed involuntarily. Thanks, the human said. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm really excited to be here. Excited. The human was excited. Henna had read the file. She knew what excited humans were capable of. There were incident reports. So many incident reports. The first class was comparative xenobiology, taught by Professor Demak, a gelation, whose transparent body rippled with bioluminescent thought. The classroom was a semicircle of cushioned seating pods, each adjusted for its occupant's physiology. 34 students arranged by species groupings, with the humans seated conspicuously alone in a pod reinforced with what was definitely not blast shielding, but certainly looked like blast shielding. Today, Professor Demak burbled, his voice emanating from somewhere within his quivering mass, we will discuss pain tolerance across species, and the evolution of nociceptive response. A student named Finwick, whose species resembled ambulatory flowers with too many opinions, raised one petal hand. Professor, is it true that some species can endure significant pain without losing consciousness? An excellent question. Pain tolerance varies considerably. For instance, the Yenix can withstand approximately 3.2 units on the Galactic Pain Index before requiring medical intervention. Professor Demak pulsed yellow with academic enthusiasm. The Kurathi, who evolved in slightly more challenging environments, can endure up to quite remarkable. The human made a small noise. Everyone turned. Sorry, the human said, not looking particularly sorry. Just, what's the scale go up to? Professor Demak rippled uncertainly. The scale is logarithmic, and extends to 10 units, though that is considered theoretical. No known species has pain tolerance beyond 6.8 units. Such tolerance would require evolution in extremely hostile. He paused, suddenly remembering exactly which planet this student hailed from. Yeah, so humans are around 8.5. Last I checked. The human offered conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than their species' casual relationship with agony. Though it depends on the individual, some people are tough. The classroom fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems working overtime to keep everyone from hyperventilating in their respective atmospheric mixtures. Tougher, Professor Demock repeated weakly, fading to a disturbed shade of gray. Then 8. There was this guy who amputated his own arm with a pocket knife after a climbing accident. Took him like an hour. Then he hiked out of the canyon. A Felixian student fainted, which caused a domino effect of 3 more students requiring medical attention. Professor Demock spent the next 20 minutes trying to restore order while the humans sat there looking confused, as if they couldn't understand why telling a story about recreational self-amputation would upset anyone. This was going to be a very long semester. By lunch, rumors had spread through the academy with the speed and accuracy typical of academic institutions, which meant everyone knew the human had definitely killed and eaten Professor Demock during first period. The human, blissfully unaware of their new reputation as a potential cannibal, proceeded to the dining hall. The Celestial Academy's cafeteria was a marvel of xenobiological accommodation, offering cuisine for every dietary requirement from pure photosynthesis to gaseous absorption. The human joined the queue at the omnivore station, which primarily served the 5 species capable of processing both plant and animal matter without dying. What the human put on their plate made those 5 species reconsider their evolutionary choices. A Korathi student named Benix watched in mounting horror as the human selected the Kithrian spice root, which most omnivores avoided due to its vigorous flavor profile, and doused it in what appeared to be Terran hot sauce, which the human had apparently brought from home. The warning label on the bottle was visible from 3 tables away and included the phrases "external use only" and "may cause spontaneous regret." "Are you going to eat that?" Benix asked, their scales shifting to concerned purple. "Yeah," the human crunched into the root, which made a sound like breaking bones, and smiled. "It's good. Want some? That's a class 3 irritant. The capsaicin concentration alone." "Oh, I love spicy food," the human said cheerfully, adding more hot sauce. "This is actually pretty mild." Benix's scales went full white, which in Korathi physiology indicated existential dread usually reserved for reactor malfunctions. They watched as the human consumed food that should have required a hazmat protocol, showing no more distress than slight satisfaction. Across the cafeteria, Henna sat with a group of faculty members, her tail twitching with each new report filtering through her datapad. "They're eating chemical weapons," she whispered. "For pleasure." "Perhaps," offered Professor Demock, who had recovered but remained a sickly beige color. "This is an anomaly, one unusual student. We shouldn't judge an entire species based on an alarm blared." Emergency lights pulsed red. A mechanical voice announced atmospheric breach in section. "All students proceed to designated safe zones." This is not a drill. And somewhere in the cafeteria, the human looked up from their meal with an expression that would haunt Henna's dreams for years to come. It was the expression of someone who was about to be helpful. The atmospheric breach turned out to be a false alarm, which was fortunate for the Academy's infrastructure, but unfortunate for the growing documentation of human peculiarity. The alarm was silenced, students were ushered back to their normal schedules, and the human finished their chemically weaponized lunch without incident. This state of relative peace lasted approximately 4 hours. Physical education was not a mandatory component of most galactic curricula, primarily because the majority of civilized species had evolved past the need for physical prowess around the same time they'd discovered central heat. But the Academy maintained a wellness program, mostly consisting of gentle stretching and meditation exercises designed not to elevate anyone's heart rate beyond comfortable levels. The gymnasium was a soft-lit space with padded floors and equipment that looked more decorative than functional. Today's activity was endurance assessment, which involved walking at a leisurely pace on a track for approximately 10 minutes to measure cardiovascular baseline. The human showed up in something called athletic wear that looked aggressively practical and vaguely militaristic. Beside them, a eunuch student named Imber wore flowing robes designed to maximize air circulation while minimizing effort. "We'll begin with a simple warm-up," announced the wellness coordinator, a Gelfian whose entire body was essentially a muscular system wrapped in optimism. 2 laps around the track at comfortable speed. Listen to your body. Stop if you feel any discomfort whatsoever. The human nodded and immediately began jogging. Not running, just a light jog that probably registered as barely trying by human standard. It was the most terrifying thing 30 students had ever witnessed. Imber managed half a lap before their respiratory system politely informed them that this was quite enough exercise for the week. Other students dropped out in cascading succession, settling onto cushioned benches while medical staff checked their vital signs. By the end of 2 laps, every student except the human had stopped. The human kept going. "You can stop now," the coordinator called out, concern rippling through their muscular structure. "Oh, I'm good," the human called back, not even breathing hard. "Just getting warmed up, warmed up." The phrase hung in the air like a The human continued jogging, lap after lap, while the entire class watched in the particular silence that accompanies witnessing something that defies reasonable explanation. 5 laps, 10 laps, 50. "Perhaps they don't understand they can stop," Imber whispered to Benix, whose scales had gone through the entire color spectrum and were now settling on infrared, which didn't technically exist in visible light, but their body was making an exception for the stress. "They're smiling," Benix whispered back. "Why are they smiling?" The human was indeed smiling, the expression of someone enjoying a light morning jog, not someone who had been running for 30 minutes straight without pause. Finally, mercifully, the coordinator called an end to the session. The human stopped, did some stretches that made several students look away in sympathetic pain, and asked if there were showers available. "That was great," the human said, still not breathing heavily. "Do we do this every week?" The coordinator made a sound that didn't translate into any known language but conveyed universal existential horror. Chemistry lab was next, and if the faculty had been paying attention to patterns, they might have canceled it preemptively. But they weren't paying attention because they were too busy filing incident reports about the physical education situation. So the human proceeded to Chemistry Lab 3, along with 12 other students who were beginning to suspect their educational experience had taken an unexpected turn into nightmare territory. Professor Wexen, an insectoid Plixian, with compound eyes that could detect molecular bonds, was explaining proper safety protocols when handling Class 2 reactive compounds. The Plixians were meticulous about safety, having evolved on a world where the most dangerous chemical was mildly acidic rain. These compounds, Professor Wexen chittered, mandibles clicking pedagogically, must be handled with extreme care. Exposure can cause respiratory irritation, cellular damage, and in severe cases, mild discomfort. The human's hand went up. "What about ethanol?" Professor Wexen's antennae twitched. "Ethanol is a Class 4 toxic solvent. We don't use it in student laboratory. Exposure to ethanol vapor can cause intoxication, loss of motor control, and potentially fatal cellular damage. Humans drink it," the human said matter-of-factly. "For fun, socially." The laboratory went quiet, except for the gentle bubbling of carefully supervised reactions. "Consume industrial solvent," Professor Wexen said slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand the gravity of voluntary poisoning. "Recreationally. I mean, we call it alcohol, but yeah. Beer, wines, spirits. Some of it's like 40% ethanol." A Phylexian student made a sound like a dying refrigerator. Professor Wexen's compound eyes seemed to lose focus, which was supposedly impossible, given their physiological structure. "And theobromine," the human continued, apparently determined to document their species' casual relationship with toxins. "That's in chocolate, poisonous to most Earth species, but we eat it as candy. Oh, and caffeine, we drink that every morning to wake up. It's technically an insecticide." "You start your day with insecticide," Professor Wexen repeated, their voice climbing to frequencies usually reserved for mating calls or distress signals. "Not much. Just like 100 milligrams or so, 200 if it's a tough morning. The lab session was cancelled. Professor Wexon needed to lie down in a dark room and reconsider their understanding of biochemistry. The humans seemed confused about why everyone was upset, which was becoming a concerning pattern. By evening, an emergency faculty meeting had been convened in the administration tower. Hannah stood before a holographic display showing the day's accumulated data, her tail doing things that defied normal feline biomechanics. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," said Dean Follix, a dignified Corthan, whose scales were currently expressing deep administrative concern. "The human can run continuously for extended periods, feels pain but doesn't particularly care, and regularly consumes substances that would hospitalize any other student in the academy. That's the preliminary assessment," Hannah confirmed, pulling up another data file. "But it gets worse. I accessed the human medical file. Do you know what Earth's atmospheric composition is?" "Nitrogen and oxygen, primarily," Professor Dimmock offered, still looking beige. 21% oxygen," Hannah said. "They evolved breathing an atmosphere that's 1/5 corrosive oxidizer. Most species use oxygen concentrations of 3 to 7%. The human is essentially breathing fire all the time, and considers it normal." The faculty sat in collective silence, processing this information alongside everything else they'd learned. The human wasn't just from a death world. The human was apparently built by a death world that had looked at baseline hostility and decided to get creative. "What do we do?" asked Professor Wexon, who had recovered enough to attend but was still twitching occasionally. Dean Follix's scales rippled through several colors before settling on determined purple. "We continue the exchange program. We are educators. We adapt. We learn, and we pray to whatever deities are listening that nothing actually dangerous happens. Because I suspect our fragile human exchange student might be the most dangerous thing in this entire academy." Somewhere in the student dormitories, the human was video calling home, cheerfully telling their family about their first day at space school, completely unaware that they'd fundamentally shaken the faculty's understanding of what constituted a normal student. It was still only The following weeks established what the faculty began calling, in hushed tones during private meetings, the protocol of nervous acceptance. Classes continued. The human attended them with enthusiastic normalcy, and slowly, incrementally, the other students began to adapt to having a death worlder in their midst, the way one might adapt to living near a dormant volcano or a friendly black hole. Then came the field trip. The Academy's annual excursion to the Nebula Research Station was a tradition spanning centuries, an opportunity for students to observe stellar formation in real time from the safety of a heavily shielded observation facility. The station orbited within the nebula's outer edge, maintained at comfortable temperature and pressure, equipped with every safety system known to 43 different species engineering traditions. 30 students and 4 faculty members boarded the transport vessel on what was, ironically, another Tuesday. The human sat near the back, reading something on a datapad and occasionally looking out the viewport at the swirling cosmic gases with an expression of genuine wonder that almost made everyone forget about the walking apocalypse situation. Almost. "Attention passengers," the transport's AI announced in soothing tones designed to prevent panic during normal operations. "We are beginning our approach to Nebula Research Station. Estimated arrival in 20 minutes. Please remain seated and enjoy the view." The view was spectacular. The nebula stretched across space like paint spilled by a cosmically minded artist, all purples and blues and colors that didn't have names in most languages. Stars were being born in there, violent processes made beautiful by distance and ignorance of the actual physics involved, which is when the first alarm sounded. Not the gentle "please be aware" alarm. The specific alarm that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong and everyone should start making peace with their preferred deities. Red lights pulsed. The AI's voice lost its soothing quality and gained what could only be described as mechanical anxiety. "Attention! Thermal regulation failure in the passenger compartment. External temperature bleed detected. Current compartment temperature rising. Remain calm and proceed to emergency stations." The temperature display ticked upward. 22 degrees standard. 24. 26. For species that evolved in climate-controlled paradise conditions, this was approaching lethal territory. Panic rippled through the cabin like a wave, students scrambling for emergency gear while faculty tried to maintain order. 28 degrees, 30. Ember collapsed, their biology simply refusing to function in such aggressive heat. Phoenix's scales went transparent with shock, their cooling system overwhelmed. A Felixian student started hyperventilating, which was counterproductive but understandable. Professor Wexon was frantically trying to access emergency protocols while their exoskeleton began making concerning clicking sounds. The human stood up. "Everyone stay calm," they said with the confidence of someone who thought 30 degrees was a pleasant spring day. "Where's the environmental control panel?" "Forward cabin." Professor Wexon chittered through heat stress. "But it requires." The human was already moving, walking through temperature that was incapacitating everyone else with the casual ease of someone heading to the refrigerator for a midnight snack. They reached the forward cabin, examined the control panel with its 47 different emergency warnings, and did something that would later be described in 14 different incident reports as inadvisable but effective. They rerouted the cooling system by hand. This involved opening panels that were hot enough to damage most organic tissue, manipulating controls designed for non-heat-stressed conditions, and essentially performing emergency repair work, while the temperature hit 35 degrees and most of the cabin's occupants were seriously considering the merits of heat-induced unconsciousness. The humans' hands moved with practiced efficiency, showing no indication that they were basically working inside an oven. Sweat appeared on their forehead, which was apparently a normal human cooling response involving secreting liquid waste through skin pores. This detail would haunt the other students later, but right now they were too busy trying not to die. "Got it," the human announced. The cooling system hummed back to life with a sound like salvation sung by machines. Temperature began dropping. 33 degrees. 30. 28. The human walked back through the cabin, checking on other students with the calm demeanor of someone who hadn't just performed technical repairs in conditions that should have killed them. They helped Ember to a seat, offered Benix some water from their personal container, and asked Professor Wexon if everyone was okay. "How?" Professor Wexon managed, their voice box barely functioning. "Are you not dead?" The human looked confused. It was only 35 degrees. That's 95 Fahrenheit. Warm, but not dangerous. Humans can survive way higher temperatures. There are places on Earth where it gets to 50 degrees in summer. 50, Benix whispered, their scales doing color combinations that didn't exist in nature. "You live in places that reach 50 degrees. I mean, we complain about it," the human admitted, "and we drink a lot of water. But yeah, we just deal with." The transport limped to the research station where actual medical professionals and engineers met them with emergency equipment and mounting horror as they received reports of what had happened. The human was checked for heat damage, and found to be completely fine, showing no more distress than mild thirst and what they called a bit sweaty. The field trip was cancelled. Students were returned to the academy, and the humans, still apparently oblivious to the significance of what they'd done, asked if they could still get credit for the assignment since they'd technically seen the nebula. Dean Folix's emergency meeting that evening had a different tone than previous gathering. The holographic display showed temperature data, the humans' biometric readings during the crisis, and several theoretical models of what would have happened if the human hadn't been present. "We've been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding," Henna said quietly, her tail completely still for the first time anyone could remember. "We assumed the human was fragile because they come from a harsh world. We installed safety measures. We created protocol. We treated them like they needed protection." "And?" prompted Dean Folix, though his scales suggested he already knew where this was going. "And we have it backwards," Professor Dimmock burbled, his color finally returning to something approaching health. "The human doesn't need protection from the Academy. The Academy needs protection from accidentally killing itself while the human watches." Professor Wexon's mandibles clicked in agreement. They saved the entire transport, walked through temperature that incapacitated trained faculty, performed repairs with their bare manipulators, and they think it was normal. "Because for them it is normal," Henna finished. "We're not hosting a fragile exchange student. We're hosting something that evolution spent billions of years designing to survive absolutely everything, and we've been worried about them breaking. Dean Folix's scales settled into a color that might have been respect mixed with healthy terror. Then perhaps we should reconsider our classification system. If humans are ordinary on their world, I deeply do not want to know what they consider extraordinary. The meeting adjourned. Faculty dispersed to their quarters, and somewhere in the student dormitories, the human was writing in their journal about the exciting day, noting that the nebula was really pretty and maybe next time they could stay longer. It was no longer Tuesday, but somehow that didn't make anyone feel better. The incident report from the transport crisis filled 47 pages across multiple formats, each one attempting to explain how a single student had outperformed every safety system, every protocol, and every faculty member's ability to function under duress. The report concluded with a recommendation that was simultaneously reasonable and completely absurd. Continue observation. Avoid catastrophes. As if catastrophes were something one could schedule, and then politely decline. The human, for their part, seemed to interpret their newfound reputation as some kind of misunderstanding. They attended classes with the same enthusiasm, participated in group projects with oblivious friendliness, and continued to casually reveal alarming information about human biology as if describing the weather. In astrophysics, they mentioned that Earth had been struck by civilization-ending asteroids multiple times, and life had simply evolved harder out of spite. In xenopsychology, they explained that humans had survived ice ages by inventing clothing and fire, which sounded reasonable until one considered they'd done this without any technology beyond rocks and determination. In literature, they recommended a human author named Poe, whose works were subsequently banned from the Academy Library for being psychologically hazardous to sensitive species. The other students developed a complex relationship with their human classmate, somewhere between fascination and the kind of respect one reserves for natural disasters. They asked questions, carefully, the way scientists might poke at something radioactive with very long instruments. Is it true, Inber ventured one day in the communal study area, that humans evolved from pursuit predators? The human looked up from their homework, which was technically due in 3 days, but they'd apparently finished it already because humans didn't require as much sleep as civilized species. Yeah, persistence hunting. We'd just chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Could take hours, but we'd just keep running. That's horrifying, Bennick said, their scales expressing existential dread in ultraviolet. It's pretty metal, the human agreed cheerfully, using a colloquialism that didn't translate but somehow conveyed exact meaning through context and tone. And you have nightmares? Asked a Plixian student, whose name was a series of clicks that the translation matrix rendered as anxious inquiry. Your own brains attack you during rest cycles with simulated threats? Oh yeah, nightmares are the worst, the human commiserated. Last week I dreamed I showed up to class without pants. Woke up in a cold sweat. The study group processed this. The human's brain considered social embarrassment equivalent to mortal danger. The same brain that had calmly performed repairs in lethal heat, treated pants-related anxiety as a legitimate threat response. Your species, Inber said slowly, is insane. Yeah, probably, the human agreed. But like functional insane. Mostly. The qualifier hung in the air like a warning label that had arrived several months too late. The final examination period arrived with the inevitability of academic tradition, bringing stress levels that had faculty members medicating themselves with specially formulated relaxation compounds. Students huddled in study groups, reviewing material with the desperate intensity of people who understood that failure meant disappointing parents across multiple star systems. The humans studied too, but with noticeably less panic, primarily because human stress responses were apparently calibrated for actual life-threatening situations, rather than educational assessment. This created an interesting dynamic where the human ended up comforting other students, assuring them that exams were survivable, which, coming from a species that defined survivable as didn't technically die, was both reassuring and deeply concerning. The advanced xenobiology final was comprehensive, covering everything from basic cellular structures to complex ecological systems. Professor Dimmock had designed it to be challenging but fair, assuming students had attended lectures and completed the reading. The human finished in 45 minutes. The exam was scheduled for 3 hours. Professor Demock rippled through several colors that indicated academic confusion. "You're certain you've completed all sections?" "Yeah, I checked twice," the human said. The question about extremophile adaptation was tricky, but I remembered the case study about those bacteria that live in volcanic vents on Earth. Figured if they could survive there, the principles probably applied universally. "Volcanic vents," Professor Demock repeated weakly. "Your planet has organisms that thrive in volcanic vents." "Sure, tons of them. Life finds a way, you know." Professor Demock did not know. Professor Demock was beginning to suspect that Earth's definition of life was fundamentally different from everyone else's definition, involving significantly more spite and refusal to die under any circumstances. The exam results were posted 3 days later. The human had scored in the 94th percentile, which was impressive but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the notation. Professor Demock had added, "Student demonstrated comprehensive understanding of extreme environment adaptation, likely due to personal experience living on a hellscape. Recommend accommodation for species bias in future assessment." The end-of-term ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, with students from all 43 species gathered to celebrate surviving another academic cycle. Dean Fowlix presided from a hovering platform, his scales rippling through ceremonial colors, while he delivered the traditional address about growth, learning and interspecies cooperation. "This year," he said, his voice carrying through translation matrices in 43 different formats, "we have learned valuable lessons about diversity, resilience, and the importance of challenging our assumptions." Several faculty members nodded with the particular weariness of people who had learned those lessons the hard way. "We have also learned," Dean Fowlix continued, with what might have been humor or possibly trauma, "that the universe is larger and more varied than we imagine. That strength comes in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most ordinary individuals from extraordinary places remind us that our understanding of normal is, perhaps, somewhat limited." The humans sat in the audience, looking pleased but not particularly aware they were the subject of this philosophical observation. Beside them, Imber and Benix had claimed seats with the possessive determination of students who had survived a year with a Deathworlder, and now considered themselves battle-hardened veterans of academia. Awards were distributed. The human received a certificate of completion, which they accepted with genuine happiness that was almost enough to make everyone forget they could probably survive a direct meteor strike. Almost. As the ceremony concluded, and students began filtering toward the exit, Hannah found herself standing beside the human, her tail twitching with residual anxiety that had become basically permanent. "So," she said carefully, "will you be returning next term?" The human's face lit up with enthusiasm that was both heartwarming and terrifying. "Definitely. I've learned so much, and I was thinking about joining the hiking club next semester. I saw they do excursions to low-gravity." "The hiking club," Hannah repeated, her mind already composing the incident reports that would inevitably follow, "on low-gravity moons. Yeah, should be fun. On Earth we have to hike uphill in full gravity. This'll be way easier." Easier. The human thought low-gravity moon hiking would be easier. Hannah's tail achieved angles that defied geometry. "We'll look forward to having you back," she managed, because what else could she say? The human was polite, academically successful, and had saved lives. The fact that they were also a walking reminder that the universe contained horrors beyond imagination was just something everyone would have to accept. The human smiled, showing those forward-facing predator teeth, and headed off to join their study group for celebratory refreshments that definitely didn't include ethanol because the faculty had learned that lesson already. Dean Fowlix appeared beside Hannah, his scales expressing resignation mixed with something that might have been pride. "Another year," he said quietly. "Another year." They stood together, watching the students depart, the human visible in the crowd by virtue of being surrounded by students who were simultaneously their friends and deeply aware they were friends with something that evolution had specifically designed to be unstoppable. Somewhere in the galaxy, on a little blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star,
humanity continued existing with the cheerful obliviousness of a species that had looked at a death world and decided to not just survive but thrive. They invented things, explored things, and occasionally applied to prestigious academic institutions, without fully understanding that their very presence would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of what ordinary meant. The Galactic Educational Exchange Program had been operating for 4,000 standard cycles. It would continue operating, adapting, learning, and now it would do so, with the knowledge that somewhere out there, on a planet that was actively trying to kill its inhabitants, an entire species of unkillable, cheerful, academically minded persistence predators, was waiting to apply. The human had been ordinary by their world's standard. They'd done nothing more than exist, attend classes, and occasionally prevent catastrophes with the casual competence of someone who considered survival a baseline expectation rather than an achievement, which was, in retrospect, exactly what made them so extraordinarily terrifying. The academy's lights dimmed for evening cycle, students dispersed to their quarters, faculty members filed their final reports of the term, and in the grand cosmic irony that the universe seemed to specialize in, the most dangerous thing in the entire facility was sleeping peacefully in student housing, dreaming about showing up to class without pants, completely unaware that they'd become a legend, just another ordinary human in an extraordinary classroom somewhere beyond the stars. Some civilizations built monuments to their heroes, some composed songs. The Celestial Academy simply updated its emergency protocols and braced itself for next semester, when the hiking club would attempt low-gravity excursions, accompanied by a species that had learned to walk upright specifically to chase prey across entire continents. The galaxy would adapt. It always did. It just might take a few thousand more cycles and significantly more incident reports.